This is Political Communication, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. As we become more involved with our computer screens when interacting with each other, one thing we likely notice is how much attention we pay to other people's faces now that we are up close and personal with each other. We are in each other's faces even if we are maintaining social distance. Because we pay so much attention to the face, and we pay more attention to the faces of leaders, we can appreciate how important it is to interpret the signals of what these faces are communicating. To get this information right, it helps to have a good theory of emotion. Over the past few centuries, we have had better and better theories of emotion as scholars and scientists have focused more and more on the face. Whether Duchenne du Boulogne sticking electrical prods in a homeless man's face, or Charles Darwin observing closely the animals on his farm and at the local zoo, in addition to having correspondence with his scientist colleagues across the world, we are better for their work. They helped us understand humans with our initial theorizing about what lies behind the faces that people make. In this video, we will go over first the major theories of emotion, and then we will consider what the recent science tells us what we should look for as we look at the face. One of the most important studies in the past decade plus comes from my colleague Bridget Waller, who along with James Cray and Ann Burroughs considered faces from 18 cadavers. Of these, 11 were female, and they range in age of death from 61 to 100 years old. Here, they dissected the cadaver's faces looking at their muscles and analyzed them for both the muscles' presence and whether they exhibit lateralism. In other words, were strong facial muscles only seen on one side of the face, or were these muscles seen on both sides of the face? What Bridget and her colleagues found was that there were 5 facial muscles that were key. This is because these facial muscles were present in 100% of the cases and were largely bilateral. These muscles were the frontalis, the pars medialis, and the pars lateralis muscles, and these are seen on the forehead, and they raise the eyebrows and they open up the eyes widely. The orbicularis oculi is a muscle that opens and shuts the eye sphincter, so it's a muscle that surrounds the eyes itself. The orbicularis oris is another sphincter muscle, the muscle around the mouth, and this is most important for opening and shutting this sphincter. Now, the depressor anguli oris pulls the corners of the lips downwards, whereas the zygomaticus major, which we know as the smile muscle, pulls the lip corners up and at an angle. Of these muscles, they are all key for what is seen as the basic emotions of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, and disgust. Emotions that are seen throughout a person's lifespan and across cultures. Of these muscles, only the sphincter muscles of the eyes and the mouth, the orbicularis oculi and the orbicularis oris, respectively, are necessary for non-signaling purposes. In other words, while we certainly need these to be able to open our eyes and mouth to eat, drink, and see the food and water that we consume to survive, the face's major duty is beyond these basic needs is to communicate. This leads us to the prevailing approach to understanding emotions, the basic emotion theory. While certainly we see basic emotions across a person's lifespan and across cultures, this approach is more of a folk psychological approach, which is based upon people sharing terms for what they feel internally and by their being readily able to communicate these feelings to others. But while these 7 emotions of sadness, happiness, fear, surprise, disgust, contempt, and anger are well known to the majority of humanity, and they provide an easy way by which things are easily defined and shared across individuals, there are so many different variations of each emotion. For instance, you may have noted that happiness is the only positive emotion identified by basic emotion theory, meaning that there's greater variation in negative emotions. However, in real life, this isn't the case. We all feel more than just happiness. We feel contentment, awe, joy, pleasure, excitement, pride, hopefulness, interest, comfort, and so many more different positive emotions. And we can see these variations in people's faces. Indeed, we have found a way to communicate our emotions in all their subtlety in a written visual format. Social media is an ongoing and important part of all our lives, especially as we've moved on from just texting words to including emojis in our short written messages. We do so to better communicate our thoughts and emotional intent to each other. Not that emojis are necessarily new. We went from smiley faces on pins and bumper stickers in the 1970s to emoticons where we wrote our emotions using keyboard characters to what we have readily on our smartphones today. We all have our favorite emojis to communicate emotions in our messages to others. Indeed, most of us have a special vocabulary of emojis that we rely upon when texting and using other forms of social media. And when we consider emojis, it is no longer just one basic smiley face. There's a broad range of available options with multiple different types of smiles amongst the choices we make. Indeed, regardless of the study carried out, where it was covered out, and when, most of the top 10 emojis are positive, whether they're smiles or hearts, and the number one emoji invariably is a smile emoji of one form or another. While we don't necessarily see it in our professional communication that often, as we get to know people and want to communicate our social intent to them, emojis start to become used amongst our colleagues and even our bosses. So we see that one problem with the basic emotion theory approach is that there's a whole range of different emotions being communicated on a regular basis just through social media. The variety of emotions expressed in different emojis, just like the range of facial expressions we see on people, is vast. And as we see in our choices to communicate emotions and the choices used by others, there are a lot of differences between individuals. Certainly, this theory of basic emotions is a great starting place for understanding facial communication and should be recognized as a cornerstone from which modern theory has been built, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. Perhaps more important is that when you start analyzing facial display behavior, what is theorized to be basic emotions is not so basic after all. Across hundreds of hours of coding facial display behavior in politicians and other notable political figures, with the exception of smiles conveying happiness, which we will deal with later, I have rarely seen the facial configurations theorized by the basic emotions theory. While I might see some components of an emotion, such as tightened lips when someone is angry, all the parts don't come together into a neatly schematic face. Different facial movements do occur together, but timing is everything when you're analyzing facial displays on a frame-by-frame basis. And they matter when you are processing the information a face provides consciously or preconsciously yourself. We respond to these fleeting facial displays even when we are not conscious of doing so. With this in mind, perhaps the best way of understanding emotions, especially when they are communicated by the face, is through the theory developed by Claude Scheer and his team at the University of Geneva. This componential processing model of emotion appraisal, the CPM, suggests a good deal of complexity to understanding emotionally relevant stimuli. So, as you can imagine, this all happens so very quickly, with appraisal of any person or event flashing across someone's face extremely quickly. And different persons, events, or things might be more relevant, and as a result, more visible on different people's faces. The main thing is knowing what to look for when we look at someone's face. By breaking the face down into specific movement patterns, in other words, action units, we can get a better idea of what is going on in someone's face. In other words, to understand someone, we must first take their measure in as impartial a manner as possible. From the accurate description of the face and its movements, we can get at more insightful understanding of what lies beneath. And once we can describe what is happening in our face, as well as in our body, our self-knowledge is expanded immensely, as is our knowledge of what others are feeling and thinking and what they might do.